how much time do our clients think that we spend on a real estate transaction versus how much time do we actually spend? And then how does that impact agent compensation?
Are renter being used and taken advantage of? We will discuss how to save them. Plus, we will discuss mortgages, new construction, and what happened with pending sale. This is Real Estate Backstory, and my name is Ming Richardson. I'm the compliance broker for Maximum One Realty and Realtor Partners.
My name is Alan Richard. I'm the managing broker here at Maximum Realtor Partners. And we want to jump right into this. There's a recent survey out where it said that 25% of buyers said that they felt that their agent spent about 10 or less hours working on their home purchase transaction. In that same survey, almost half, 46% of buyers said, you know what? I
We
think,
spend less 15 hours.
yeah, less than 15 on their transaction. And so, we got to understand that we have a kind of a perception problem because the reality of it is like if you add up how many hours that we take from searching for properties, engaging with clients, we'll work with clients for years before they're actually ready to buy. When you add all that up, the average real estate professional spends 87 hours
Minimum.
per transaction, right? That's like the bottom line entry. So we have to understand that there's this idea that we don't work really hard, that we aren't, some folks feel like we don't provide a lot of value out there, and that's kind of a big
And,
concern for us
and the
here.
reason being is that we make things seem seamless. And we do that to take away the stress of our client. There's a lot of time we actually will have conversation in the back end to ensure the transaction is seamless. So that's a part the buyer does not see because it is stressful enough to buy a
Yeah.
house without worrying the minute details that can be ironed out as a real estate professional. We can engage with the person
Right.
who is responsible
And that's
for
the
those
toughie, right?
areas.
Because if you're doing a great job, you're reducing the stress, the complexity of the transaction for your clients. You're doing all that to where they're like, man, you guys sure got it easy. And like
Yes.
realistically, for a lot of us, we look like a duck in the water. Above the water, just fine, paddling along. Underneath the water,
We're
we're paddling
battling.
like hell, right? Yeah, exactly. So like that is a big challenge that we do have to make sure that we are providing value and talking about the value that we bring. One other concern that we have is that in that same survey, they were like, okay, generally speaking, do you think real estate agents are paid too much? And pre the NAR settlement, before the NAR settlement, it was about 57% of folks said that we
Absolutely.
were spent too much. After the NAR settlement, almost 63. Two-thirds of our clients thinks that we're overpaid.
We're
Eh,
overcompensated.
Yeah, and I find that to be really concerning when you look at how much time we actually spend on and for our clients,
Well,
and the perception that we're lazy, we're overpaid, those kind of things. We've got to make sure that we're doing a really good job talking about,
and you guys, it's the
yeah,
power of media. Media can make us look like a bad guy and that we're
but
overcompensating
we can't
and all that
change the
stuff.
media.
We
All we can do
can't.
is change what we do,
Yes,
right?
and that's why the buyer education is so important. Make sure you have a good consultation because the buyer needs to know which way to maneuver.
Right.
A lot of time when they're buying a home. So, and those education comes from you.
Well, and right now, really, the reason that there's so much conversation around this topic right now is largely because we've had so many changes in our industry related to compensation. And just have to be ready and understand that where the industry is headed, regardless of where GAR forms or where
The
whatever talking
settlements,
heads, any or seven, all that. At the end of the day, our entire industry is moving towards a consumer centric model. And the folks who realize this early on are a part of this consumer centric model. They're going to be the ones who can help more folks buy and sell homes out there.
absolutely.
So like in a consumer centric model, we have where the buyer broker sets their services and their fees to work with a buyer. And so and we have that right now. The buyers and or the buyer's agent sign or has their buyer sign a buyer brokerage agreement stating these are the services I provide, these are the fees I charge.
Correct.
On the listing side, listing broker sets their fees and services with the sellers. Now, they also need to inform the sellers to be prepared that the buyers will probably need some assistance on their agent's compensation. But the big kicker is that for listing agents, you need to be negotiating your compensation. And then at
Correct.
the end of the day, what really, and I know that there's a lot of folks fighting this, but what we're really seeing is that purchase agreements, the purchase and sale agreements, is really kind of like directing the distribution of fees. We're seeing where those things are getting spelled out, not so much on the listing side, but definitely on the buyer's side of things. We have to be very careful that we aren't steering anyone,
Absolutely.
and the whole idea that an agent wouldn't show a property because of it, because
The
of what it's being.
compensation is not there.
Yeah.
So that's no longer the case. Understand anything, just like anything else, seller can offer anything they want up front. But it's about the package, the purchase and sale package.
Mhm.
And whatever you present may affect how seller's going to respond. So therefore, please do show your client the properties, but have a very frank conversation with them. This is part of your buyer consultation.
Show your clients all properties. That's a
Correct.
really big deal out here. Like I know that in FMLS in our market that you can see how much compensation is offered, but at the end of the day, and I'm not trying to say that it doesn't matter, but your agreement as a buyer's agent is with your buyer.
Correct.
That may be what the seller is offering. That doesn't mean that the seller gets to dictate what you get paid.
Correct.
Right? And so we have to be very careful that on one side we're talking about all the consumer focused items, but like steering is a real important feature. I mean, we got to make sure that we have
We're not steering.
fair housing
Period.
going forward, because really what we're seeing that cooperative compensation is kind of like compensation is being decoupled,
Correct.
meaning the buyer negotiates with the buyer's agent, the seller negotiates with the seller's agent. Now, the seller can pay their buyer's agent, but that is normally done through the purchase and sale
So
contract.
understand each side represent one the other, okay? And when you guys get together, that's a purchase and sale agreement. That's
Yeah.
where everything is put in place and it's all spelled out.
Now let's talk about what are some of the challenges that we're seeing happen out there. And so, like one of the big questions that we're getting, especially for
Why
buyer's
do
agents
I
right
have
now.
to sign an agreement with
Yeah.
you as a realtor or real estate agent to see a home for sale?
Well, first of all realtors are now required to have buyers sign a buyer representation agreement stating who we represent, the services we provide, and the fees that we charge prior to showing any property. These are our rules for how we operate. And so if you have a client that's having a hard time with that, the challenge really falls on you because you haven't built enough trust. You haven't provided enough value before actually like never would we recommend that you stand in the doorway with a piece of paper and be like, you know what? If you'll sign this, I'll show you this house. That's jacked up, and that's not the way that we should be doing business. I know we have some folks that are kind of using this purchase and sale, I mean the buyer brokerage agreement kind of as a way for you to kind of, all right, I'll show you this property if you sign it. But that's not what's really driving our industry. That's not what relationships are built on, that kind of stuff. So we have to make sure that we're providing value right up front. One of the other big concerns that our buyers have is
I can't afford to pay you your fee, outline the agreement. It's because right now the interest rate is so high and I'm already have put these down payment. And if a seller's unwilling to pay, I can't pay you further.
well, see, like compensation is still, like that's a conversation that used to be we just didn't have a lot of those conversations. It was, a lot of folks just kind of went with whatever the seller was offering. But now a lot of our sellers aren't offering anything. And at the end of the day, you're working off your agreement with your
Buyer.
buyer, right? So just because now, if our buyer can't afford to pay our fees up front and needs that financed in,
That's where you need to negotiate in purchase and sale.
yes.
Okay, on behalf of your buyer, because now you do have a representation. That representation allow you to present the
Negotiate. I can
offer
negotiate on your
to the
behalf.
benefit of your buyer.
Right. So, like can we ask the seller to pay to cover the buyer's brokerage fees? Yes.
Absolutely.
Same thing as we could ask the seller to cover closing costs or buying down points or make these repairs. All these are requests that we can make of the seller. Now, if the seller says no, that becomes an affordability issue for the
Correct.
buyer. That means the buyer can, just the same as if a seller said, "Well, I'm not paying any closing costs," and your buyer can't afford to buy the home without closing costs thrown in. It's the same sort of negotiation. But at this point, we wouldn't have even got to this point if we didn't have an agreement here. And so, just
That
the
agreement is
fact that
extremely
we can
important.
negotiate on your behalf right there.
Right.
One other thing that we're seeing some buyers say,
Why if I just go directly to the listing agent to represent me?
well, in that instance, like the listing agent will represent you as a customer. They're going to represent
Nine
their
out of ten,
seller.
not always.
Yeah,
There are companies that allow dual agency.
there are, but most of the time, I guess, thank you. What we really see is that the seller will
Seller.
represent, or the listing agent will represent the seller as a client. They'll represent the buyer as a customer. However, that listing agent owes
Fiduciary duty
to
to
the
the
seller,
seller, and
right?
while representing buyer as a minuscule clerical capacity.
So, whose best interest does the listing agent have? They have the seller's best interest. They don't have your best interest out there.
The only problem I see with dual agency, I know this is not like some agency doesn't like to talk about this, is that when
I
you
don't
have
like it.
two masters, who are you going to serve?
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, is it serving you? Is it serving the agent or the seller or the buyer? You see how this can be a toss up because a lot of people say, well, you did this
Mm-hmm.
because, and vice versa. I don't highly recommend, even if you brokerage allow it, I recommend you have do a referral back to someone else
Yeah.
and let the buyer have their own representation.
Yeah. We also hear some folks out there saying, "Well, should we just avoid the houses that aren't offering any kind of compensation?" No, this is steering, right? We have to be very careful. Now, if
Unless
our
your
buyer
buyer
says,
says, I will not go see any property that does not offer compensation. And then you're not steering. But please
well,
get that
be
in
very,
writing.
very careful here because I mean, like on one hand, what Ming says is true, but what we're seeing on the legal side of things, from a fair housing point of view and that kind of stuff, Ming's right. But where Ming's is not right is on the legal side of things. What we're seeing is the attorneys are saying, the attorneys from this lawsuit saying, all right, if you're not showing a property that's not showing that shows zero compensation, or they're not advertising compensation, well then you're steering those clients away from there. You're allowing your client. And
So
now
unless the
I'm just being
client
very, very
signs,
careful with
they
this.
will not seize it. So make
So
sure in
we
our
do have a
world,
special step 110 that you can use that way, but just be
absolutely.
so careful of this because we don't know that someone would come after you or your buyer
Well,
for
there's
this.
also guys, there's also
But we're
tester
seeing
out
where
there.
folks are. Well,
Okay.
everybody's sue happy right now,
Right,
right?
it
We're a very
is.
litigious society right
Well,
now.
and right now there are testers out there that will test you and see whether or not you're steering.
Yep.
So if you are going to have a client that refuses to see property that does not offer compensation, make sure you put that in writing. Bottom line, if it's not in writing, it doesn't count in our world.
Well, and just be very careful. We have to be very clear that we aren't steering. Like we're going to negotiate our compensation with the buyer. The properties that I want the buyer to have every opportunity to see every buyer. I mean, every property that's on the
Available
market,
that's
and
within their
then we're
perimeter.
going to include that as part of. We're going to, if they need that's covered as part of the purchase and sale, then we're going to put that as part of the purchase and sale. We're either going to use F-259 or we're going to use special step 620, and make sure that that's clearly communicated. And if they can't buy it that way, then that becomes an affordability issue.
Mhm.
But to not show them that property, that we don't know of anybody getting sued for this right now. But can it happen in the future? It sure can. See, one thing we got to be really careful for here is that we start treating buyers the way that we have sellers. I
Well,
mean, for ages.
Right. So no more this last minute thing. This is why I'm saying buyer consultations is extremely important, and that you give the buyer the right to decide what's their next move based on their needs, because not all buyer would disclose everything to you, whether it's personal, financial, or circumstantial. You don't know that. And so all you can do is respond back to them and give them options based on what you've been disclosed.
But
And
those options come from having a
correct.
buyer's presentation. You've got to make appointments ahead of showing property and sit down and provide value. You have to talk about this. You have to talk about all the things that we do. Like the whole taking this all the way back to our very initial discussion here, which was that folks don't feel like we do enough. If you're not having a buyer's presentation, if you're not going through and talking about all the services you provide, all the things that you're doing, and all you do is just here, sign this piece of paper, and I'll show you a house.
That's
Well, I
no
wouldn't think that you're
longer,
worth it either,
yeah,
right? So, like this is how we fix our perception issue. We sit down and we have a very thorough buyer presentation, a very thorough listing presentation. These are all the services I provide. These are all the things that I'm going to do to help sell your home, to help you find the perfect home, these kind of things. And we provide that value up front, and then either we get a listing agreement signed or we get a buyer brokerage agreement signed, and then we're able to
absolutely.
move forward. Because even though like all this whole conversation of everything moving forward, Mike Dupree, he just did a recent breakdown on compensation. So even though we've seen all this talk about compensation and what was compensation was going to go down, everyone was worried that buyer agency and buyer compensation was going down. And you know what, it hasn't hardly moved at all, right? It was average compensation nationwide was 2.65. And then after, as soon as the NAR settlement came out, it was 2.62. And then it kind of worked its way to 2.59. And then after the NAR settlement kicked in place, it's still 2.59. Is that, I mean, those are our national averages here on what we are. So understand that we don't, yes, the commission lawsuits has had an impact in how we do things. However, one of the nice things that's really come out of this has been just the amount of transparency that have really moved into our transactions, right?
Absolutely.
Now our buyers know who's paying, our sellers know who's paying, who I represent, who you represent in the transaction, kind of stuff. The whole idea that this is going to be this massive seismic shift in our industry, and dogs and cats living together and all this crazy stuff that everyone was
They
really
do once
worried
in a
about.
while.
Well, but like all I'm saying is that we are weathering through this, and either you're going to be part of the change or this is just going to roll right over you. So be
And I
really
will
smart
tell
about what you're
you,
really
for
doing.
those of us who have practiced for a very long time, please accept the change. Please accept the legal um, trend that we're
Yeah.
in, because to do otherwise, you will not be successful
Yeah.
in this business for a long period of time.
All right, let's change gears really quick because existing sales jumped up in October. We saw it, it jumped like 3 to 4%, and so that's a really nice jump in a month. And then the thing is like I'm really glad to see that. But why did that happen? Well, it happened because what also happened in October, rates went whoop and
Yep.
dropped, and so we saw this really nice kick in October out of business. However,
The mortgage company is
I mean, the
still,
mortgage rates are not our friend again,
no,
right?
they're not.
I mean, we're in the higher sixes again right now, and I guess what I really want to talk about is even though we're seeing rates not where we want them to be, we know, like, look how much demand there really is. Rates will be moderating. Okay, they may not be right now. The market's in flux. No one knows what the Feds are going to do. That kind of stuff. Even with all this kind of stuff going on, even with rates in the high sixes, guess what? Mortgage applications were up 2% last week. They were up 1% over last year. FHA was up
3%,
3%, and
which is
VA was
not
up almost 10 and over 9%
9%.
for VA was
Yes.
up. So this is one of those things like even though you see things like that, a lot of times real estate folks will see that and they'll be like, oh, I'm just, there's no point. Now's the time to still engage. Now's the time to
Absolutely.
reach out because the rates will be moderating, right? And I'm not, do I know when and where? I don't have a crystal ball, but we know that that's going to be kind of going on.
So jumping in the topic, a
Yep.
renter right now makes up about roughly 1/3 of United States household.
Yeah. And so basically, we know that, 2/3 of folks in the US own a home, 1/3 rents, right? And so, what does that really mean, though? That means that there is 30 renters for
For
every.
every home for sale in US.
All right, I want that to kind of sink in a little bit. For every listing, so for every listing out there, there are 30 people renting a home for every single listing that we have out there. And the re and I want to tie this back to something that's really kind of odd at the same time, because here's the correlation. So like
Mhm.
Invitation Homes is the largest owner of single family rental homes in the United States. And by the way, and they're big in 17 markets. And guess what? The market where they're almost the biggest in Atlanta. I mean, I
Atlanta.
don't mean like Atlanta proper. I mean all the way around
Atlanta.
Atlanta kind of thing. So, Invitation Homes just announced that they're investing another 200,
$200 million joint venture.
and they're buying new
New.
construction, right? And so we see people who, I mean, right now we're hearing folks who are like, well, is the market going to go down? And I'm not sure if I should buy, and these kind of things. When you look at how many renters are out there, and where does wealth in the United States come from?
Home
It
ownership.
comes from home ownership. And so, well, the thing that the Invitation Homes knows that a lot of renters don't know is that if I own the homes, I make the money. I make
Hmm.
that's the whole idea here. So as long as our renters are going to keep paying, and don't get me wrong, we own rental property. We appreciate our renters, and I think that that's an important piece of our segment. But at the same time, we know that for the health of communities, of people's personal wealth, that comes in home ownership. And so I'm never going to stand by the sidelines and be like, oh well, folks are renting, I guess that's a good thing for me as a landlord. As a landlord, yeah, that's a totally great thing. But as an American, nothing.
Nah,
I mean, like wealth is tied up in home ownership. We need to be very clear about because we need to be the folks who are being proponents for housing and for the stability of communities, and what a big impact this makes on people's lives.
absolutely.
Because even though we've seen all, like all these things going on, we are still seeing very modest property value appreciation.
Yeah, a lot of people think, oh, the foreclosure's coming. We're seeing foreclosure. Yes, the foreclosure is coming, but it's a very minute
It's
increment.
we're always going to have some
And
foreclosures,
absolutely. And so, they're thinking the price is going to drop. But guess what? In October, there's a 0.5% increase in value of homes.
right?
So please don't think we're going to go back to be back pre-pandemic pricing, because that's not happening.
Yeah.
Just as your salary is not being cut if you're a W-2 employee.
Yeah. So like Zillow is probably one of the largest real estate data aggregators out there, kind of thing. Love them, hate them, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They collect a lot of real estate data, and they just released their predictions for the 2025. So what's going to happen by market from this year to next year, and they're looking at nationwide an average property value appreciation of 2.9%. And if you look at what their predictions are for the Atlanta market in particular, it's like 2.6%. And you're going to see some markets that are going to lose a little bit of value. You're going to see some markets that gain big value. Overall, somewhere in that 2.5 to 3.5% range, that's pretty normal, and that's a good safe place. We're seeing where property value appreciation is moderating, but it's still appreciation. Properties are still worth more this year than they
So
were worth last
just a
year.
little thought. So, while you're waiting for the interest rate to drop 1%, just remember the house is increasing by 2.9% every
Yeah,
year on the average right now. So, the longer you wait, I promise you, the longer you're going to purchase a
yeah.
home at much higher value.
So our builders are suddenly feeling optimistic, largely because the election's
Yes.
over. Now, we say that not because we think that, and there's no data that says builders are conservative or builders are pro-Trump. That's not what it means. It means that as a business owner, I know what to expect moving forward. This would have happened the same way,
If any other party,
regardless of who jumped in. But
correct.
there's a lot of businesses that just like, okay, we're trying to see what the federal government's take is going to be. But the good news is that's kind of opened up. Now, the positive side of that is, even though we've seen that builders are ramping up, feeling a lot more optimistic, the good news for us, especially in light of what we've been talking about, is that multifamily apartment construction is
Holding
down.
back a little bit.
Yeah, but what's
That's the
building
good
up
news.
is single
Single
family.
family.
Those are improving. So we're really glad.
Absolutely.
We're really, really glad to see that. So please, if we can be of any kind of service, you can get more tips, tricks, ideas. Click on the links for one of our masterminds. Join us, for all of our CE trainings. You can find all of our continuing education training at mx1training.com. Have a great week.
Thank you and have a great day.